Hello, my friends. Welcome to me, your host, Christian Watson. So, my friends, many of you may have heard that about 2 weeks ago, the House Judiciary Committee passed H.R. 40, which is a bill proposed by the House Democrats, particularly Shelia Jackson Lee, which aims to study the advancement of the cause of reparations in the United States government. It basically wants to form a committee to study how best or how to particularly divvy out or establish reparations for Black Americans. And of course, the premise of this entire thing is the idea that Black Americans are still unjustly ailed by the sins of slavery in the 1700s, 1800s, 1900s. More sharecropping in the 1900s than going over to Jim Crow laws in the 1900s, the early 20th century. So that's what this committee is proposed to do. And, my friends, I've written about reparations before. I wrote one article about it, and every time I think about this issue, I just think about the grounds it is conceived upon. Many people rightly argue that people shouldn't be held responsible for something they didn't do, and I agree. I think justice has to have a sort of reciprocal element to it if it's actually going to be justice. It has to be reciprocal and proportional, and for that to happen, it has to be measured on an individual level, and that individual level has to have some sort of, action in producing the harm that the justice is meant to correct. Because ultimately, my friends, the concept of justice is somewhat of a corrective mechanism, at least how we conceptualize it in the United States. Now, of course, there are many different theories of justice, right? There are many different theories of justice, but I think that we typically use that as a corrective mechanism. But anyway, the premise of this entire thing, however, is that there is a problem that ails, or there are many problems that ail the Black community, and these problems can be explained and reduced to the fact that many Black Americans, many years ago, whether it was a few decades ago or whether it was a few hundred years ago, are the victims of slavery. And Shelia Jackson Lee, the Congresswoman from Texas, she said, reparations are ultimately about respect and reconciliation in the hope that one day all Americans can walk together for a more just future. So I want you guys to think about this foundationally. There are three things that are wrong with reparations and why I think they're fundamentally immoral. Number one, reparations deny the reality of the I, the letter I. It was Henry David Thoreau that said that the first person is oftentimes omitted in many novels and many social discourses. But that, and this has been Walden in the section called Economy, but in that his discourse, he would not omit the first person. There's power in that, my friends, because he argues that the first person is this sort of all-pervasive, universal feature of our lives. The first person is you. Whenever you speak about something, you are speaking in the first person. Even if you are referring to something in the second or the third person, the first person is still the one that is speaking. You cannot remove the first person from who you are. You see what I'm saying? The first person represents you at the very core essence of your being. This is what Thoreau thought. I think that he's right. Because in all honesty, no matter how many perspectives we have, we still can only speak from the mechanism that allows us to convey our perspective, and that is our first person, that is our being. Reparations forgets that. Reparations actually abstracts the first person, gets rid of it, and reconstitutes it into a broad image, which is meant to encompass many different people on the basis of typically an arbitrary feature, their race, and then uses that image to make prescriptions about particular concrete policy initiatives. So it creates an abstract image and tries to apply it to concrete issues. Now, the problem is this. Abstract images are susceptible to our mental and linguistic tampering. Man can create anything in his mind. The mind is like this sandbox of endless possibilities that man can use to create certain things. Why do you think the genre of fantasy exists? So long as you are able to talk about things in very, 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 very broad terms and not really measure if those broad terms actually relate to reality, so long you are able to potentially Well, first of all, to control the story that is being told, and to potentially miss what is actually happening in reality. To be a moral being, my friends, you must understand that reality exists, and reality is absolute. And there are certain things that happen in reality that have consequences, and there are certain principles that animate those consequences. You cannot really be a fully rational and moral being, because to be a moral being, you have to be rational too, I think. You cannot fully be a fully rational and moral being without understanding the nature in which rationality and morality accent. And for the reparations person, that nature isn't really there, because they're abstracting it so far up in the sky, and then they're putting it down into the cement, into the pavement, and not actually engaging with the real world. This is a flawed understanding of human nature. And if reparations is, as I just contended to you, incorrect about human nature and justice, it cannot interact with a proper understanding of either. That's number one. Number two, a lot of the proposals for reparations are predicated upon a sense of obligation that is not actually born from how obligation is meant to be born from. My friends, obligation, and this is the general contractual understanding of obligation that was, made by John Locke and many libertarians, and I happen to agree with it. Obligation happens in two ways, in my opinion. You are obligated to not violate the rights of someone else. So you are obligated for non-interference in someone's life, unless a very key particular circumstance happens. And you are also obligated to, in the context of those that non-interference, to respect people. For non-interference to happen, for non-aggression to happen, there must be a sense of mutual respect. If there's not a sense of mutual respect, then no matter what the maxim is, no matter what the principle is, no matter what the rule is, non-aggression still has the fertile ground to happen, even though it's against the rule or the principle, right? It's like having a certain rule, but not having people who are in the mindset to enforce that rule. This can be a good thing or a bad thing, this sort of personal rebellion against rules. For many African American slaves, the rule was, you will stay in the cotton field and you will toil away tirelessly at my behest because I own you. Well, they said, okay, that rule exists, but I have the moral conscience to divert from that rule. I have the moral conscience to sing those spirituals. There's 12 gates to the city. I have the moral consciousness to inflict my innate human essence, my innate human creativity, rather, upon my circumstances to liberate me, because I got more concepts at my disposal. My friends, we have so many more concepts at our disposal than what the reparationists will tell us. We have so many more concepts at our disposal to actually understand these very, very complex ideas like justice and responsibility. We have so many more concepts than simply putting it on the shoulders of people on the basis of an abstraction. In the fictitious world that I mentioned earlier, let me go into that a little bit more. Michael Eric Dyson, who is one of the chief prophets of racial victimhood, one of the chief prophets. There are many prophets. There's Al Sharpton, there's Tariq Nasheed. There are many prophets of racial victimhood who both profit, literally, off of it, and who predict certain things on the basis of their religion, i.e. believing in the religion of identity and race. And Michael Eric Dyson thinks that white folks should be woke, and in that wokeness, put their own money into what he calls individual reparations accounts. Because the question always becomes, well, how do you pay for reparations? For Dyson, individual reparations accounts is how you pay for it. He says, an individual reparations account. You ain't got to ask the government. You don't have to ask the local politician. This is what you, an individual, conscientious, woke citizen can do. Again, but you see the false method of obligation here. The false idea of obligation here paired with the fictitious world. That is, the world that is animated and created by a single abstract idea of what it means to be responsible, of what it means to be just, that has, again, as I mentioned before, no concrete material correspondence to the actual nature of justice, the actual nature of morality. Again, if you reject the metaphysical foundations of reality and you think you can simply dream up or understand the lives of black people as a narrative of oppression and power and privilege, which is what a lot of this stuff comes down to, then you are really rejecting reality, and you're creating a single value by which you see the world. Inherent in the position of reparations is a rejection of the rational nature, as I mentioned before, that requires someone to use it if they're going to be a moral being. And I think Dyson's account here, Dyson's sentence here, his statement here, is a reflection of that. So my friends, let's recap. Number one, the reparationist rejects a proper understanding of reality. Number two, the reparationist creates a fictitious world. And number three, the idea of false obligation is on the shoulders of so many people who, again, are being viewed through an abstract lens and not through the lens that incorporates the argument of the I that Thoreau made so beautifully in Walden, the economy chapter. My friends, let's keep the I in us, the I in our being, the first person. Let's have a better and perhaps more contractual and exchange-based sense of obligation rather than an abstract sense of obligation. And, most importantly, let us not fall prey to guilt or emotions. And let's understand that reality itself is a rational, resolute entity that we can understand objectively. And we can measure that understanding through reason. And that the only way to operate as a moral being is to use your reason. Without it, you're done. Without it, you cannot possibly reach moral conclusions. And reparations most certainly is not a moral conclusion. It is, in fact, an immoral conclusion. Think on it. As always, my friends, I love you so much. If you want to support me, like, subscribe, share, comment, but most importantly, Patreon too. Patreon.com/officialcwatson or PayPal. My PayPal is officialcwatson@gmail.com. But as always, my friends, I love you, and please stay pensive. Bye-bye.